What does an 18-year veteran of the tech industry and a 20-year veteran of the military have in common? More than you might think. Welcome, everyone, to the Second Act podcast, leveling up your life's journey. We're starting 2024 off with a bang. I mean, we've had an outstanding assortment of guests come on, and today is not going to disappoint. So,
not at all.
I'm just so excited about the direction of things and the conversations we're having and the willingness of the guests to come on and, talk a little bit about some of the things they're pursuing, but also share a window into their personal lives.
Yeah.
All the way back to childhood to where they are today, the ups and downs of that to help sort of shape who they are. I think it really resonates with folks. And, we're not talking with titans of industry. We're not talking with celebrities. We're talking with real people who have amazing stories that almost anyone can relate to. And we're finding so much similarity among the diversity of our guests, which is just fantastic. It's just fantastic.
Well, I'll tell you what, Michael, I'm in my happy spot today because one, I got to get up at 5:30 this morning and shovel a couple inches of snow off the driveway as my wife headed out to the gym. And but then I'll tell you what, talk about our guests. We got to record an episode with a 11-year Marine veteran who immigrated from India, and today we're talking to an Army veteran.
Yep.
So I can actually relate to some of these stories. We're not all about tech so I feel good, and I'm excited for this episode. So
for sure,
let's get into it.
Yeah, we'll get into the details here, but there's going to be some unique intersections that happen in this conversation specifically because of my background in tech, your background in the military, and our guest background in the military, who has spent time at, I think now a tech company, but previously another industry that had some relationship to the type of work I was doing at my previous company. So there's going to be, I think our conversation is going to go in some interesting and unique directions as we make our way through this. So with that said,
I love it.
Let's reset with our guests. Welcome back to the Second Act podcast with Michael and John. We are thrilled again to have another guest on our show today. In this episode, we're honored to be joined by John Buckley, a decorated military officer who grew up in Corbin, Kentucky, the birthplace of Kentucky Fried Chicken. Love that. But later moved to Texas, where he tried out for professional baseball teams, ended up following his sports interest into soccer due to his skills on the field, as well as collegiate benefits it offered. During this time, he started serving in the National Guard and ultimately joined the Army as an infantryman in 1984. Over the course of 30 years, John rose through the Army ranks to colonel, serving in a variety of strategic advisory roles that informed Congress, NATO, the Department of Defense, and the President of the United States to achieve operational goals. His final assignments before departing the Army were directing two of the Army's most prestigious schools, the School of Advanced Leadership and Tactics, and the Command and General Staff College. In 2014, John moved into the private sector, where he now pursues his passion for building programs that help veterans through the complicated and unfamiliar process of finding employment outside of the military. John is a recognized leader in this space with numerous published articles, books, interviews, which we'll provide links to in the show notes. But outside of work, John's main hobby is spending time with his amazing family and very large family, which includes his wife and best friend, Lorraine, along with her 7 kids and 8 grandkids. He also enjoys getting outside in nature to bike and hike when time permits, which I'm not sure with a family of that size how often that happens, John, but welcome.
Welcome, John.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you, Mike and John. Appreciate the opportunity.
I don't know, with 7 kids and 8 grandkids, was that 15 total? I don't know how you have time to even do this show.
Yeah, we appreciate you carving out a few minutes to chat with us for sure.
Absolutely.
So if I understand this correctly, John, you were born in Reading, Pennsylvania, but moved to Corbin, Kentucky at an early age, and eventually out to Texas for your later years, your later teen years. So tell us about that journey and some of the standout moments that helped shape who John Buckley is today.
No, I appreciate that opportunity. I was the community in which I was born was actually where most of my cousins lived as well. So you talk about family, my dad and my mom's side, I think there were 26 cousins on each side. So
oh my gosh,
we're talking huge family, and most of them were there in that community. And I think the biggest things that I took away from that experience, obviously, was taking care of each other, but also being responsible, having those responsibilities of your own. And then I think another probably critical lesson that really shaped me was the dignity and respect, having the dignity and respect for anybody and everybody, regardless of their walk of life. So we had a tremendous time there. I was a little hellion, as you can probably imagine, and I think, deception was probably a critical thing that I learned there, and that I would stand out in my front yard and throw acorns at cars and then got caught. So I started throwing them high into the air, thinking that the timing, I would get the timing and get away from that. But and so I would still get caught and get in trouble, and I just didn't understand how I was caught. But that was probably some of my fondest memories, was spending time with my cousins, and we played a lot of sports, but mostly for fun. When my father moved to Kentucky, we moved to southeastern Kentucky, and that was a dramatic change because we had no more family other than ourselves. And I think the hardest thing for me to learn there was the accent, the very southern drawl from southeastern Kentucky. But I quickly adapted to that. But that's probably the time in my life when sports really took, a very important role. And what I quickly found out was that the same kind of critical things that we learned from family were relevant on a team. You still had to have that trust. You had to have your own responsibility, and you have to do the things that you're responsible to do to hold down the team, but also the dignity and respect. And I think probably the most important thing I learned there was criticism, and to accept criticism, because as I played a lot of different sports, whether it was a teammate or my brother who was on most of my same teams, or the coach, that's when, as you advanced into high school sports, where that criticism was important, and I started to learn to proactively seek that criticism. How can I get better? And then I think the second thing that I really, really learned was that it takes hard work. You're responsible to do all that hard work. Work hard to play hard, train hard, and prepare hard. If you didn't, then you weren't on the field on game time, or you lost. And so it really became critical for me. And then I think the hardest part of my youth was moving as a junior in high school down to southeastern Texas. So if you could imagine moving into a community where relationships were already established, and trying to get into sports again. And that's where I really focused heavily on the hard work, because I knew that I needed to lead by example. I couldn't step into a leadership role. I wasn't really accepted, so I could only lead by example. But a real critical incident happened when I still don't know why or how, but I was walking into the training room, and the coach pulled me aside, and there was three of us that he pulled aside, and he said, there's a family here that needs some help, and I'm looking for a volunteer. Another student, he was a year older than me, had been in a swimming accident and was injured severely. He was a quadriplegic. And so his parents were at that point where they were taking care of him and they needed somebody to assist as they were taking care of some responsibilities. And I volunteered. And so I was going over to this young boy's house. Well, I shouldn't say young boy, he's my age. And I would go over there every morning before school, and I would help him, get ready for the day. And you can imagine he's a quadriplegic. He needed help in everything from eating to cleaning to bathing to getting dressed to getting into a wheelchair and then pushing him out to the bus. And so that really helped me understand a lot of things in life, that if things don't go your way, you sure as heck don't need to feel sorry for yourself. Injuries that I sustained in my sports that took me off the field for a couple of days, I certainly couldn't complain. I really learned that all glory is fleeting in that instance. And although I was really making my name in baseball, and as you mentioned in the introduction, I had a couple of professional tryouts, because I met Ron, was his name, and I was taking care of him, I had to adjust my classroom schedule. And I had to sign up for 2 summer classes between my junior and senior year so that I could still take care of him the next year, my senior year. And when I got selected as a 16-year-old, probably the youngest player at the tryouts and the youngest player selected to be on this American Legion travel team, I had to tell the coach just before we started traveling that I couldn't go because I was stuck with school because I was taking care of Ron. And that was quite a bit of a sacrifice for me. And that probably ended my dreams of making it into the professional sports arena. But I think those were the things that really shaped me and carried me into my adult life. I think probably the last thing that was sort of made a perfect segue into my next stage of my life was that I didn't do anything to prepare for my next stage of life. I just thought things were going to happen. So when I got to graduation, I graduated rather high in my class. I was really well respected on both the baseball field, but I also lettered in football and basketball. And I really thought that I was going to get a call, and it just never came. And so I had no options, or at least I thought I had no options. So I decided to join the Army.
That's a phenomenal story, John. And in those formative years, as you were younger, to develop such a perspective is unusual. But I want to come back to one of the things you said about criticism and how important that is in terms of development. And so many people don't react well to criticism. And it happens in your youth. We have young audience members, but it also, throughout professional and adult life, people don't like criticism. And what sort of advice can you share that helps people accept criticism in a constructive way to use that in whatever it is they're pursuing?
Well, I think the criticism is something that will help you get better. So if you look at it from that perspective, as opposed to criticism being a negative thing and telling you what you're doing wrong, it's something that will help you to get better if you focus on it. So certainly, growing up in a family with 6 siblings, criticism was rampant, but it was always usually, typical brotherly and sisterly love, obviously.
Sure.
But then when I guess really the first time that I received some criticism was ironically on the baseball diamond again. And I was receiving the ball playing a shortstop. I was receiving the ball improperly because I was never really taught. And then I saw that I was getting better because I listened to the coaching that I received, and it was criticism. It wasn't just, coaching of here's how to do it. It was like, you're doing it wrong. And I think because of that and the manner in which it was delivered, I really learned that I don't want to ask somebody how I did with the sole feedback of getting a pat on the back. Man, that was a great catch. Man, you did this good. It's also got to be, you could have done better here. Now, certainly you're not always going to get well-delivered criticism. You might just get a,
Sure.
Really negative feedback, but
Right.
you got to accept that as well. I think, though, is the perspective that it's a way to get better. And if it's something that you're really passionate about and you want to get better, then you've got to proactively seek criticism.
I think, Michael, it's interesting that you honed in on that criticism piece, because that's exactly what I was going to talk about. In my time flying in the Marine Corps, we set up our flights to be the plan, the brief, the execution, and lastly, the debrief. And it's in that debrief portion where we ask for those darts to be thrown at us. Tell us where we failed. Tell us where we missed the planning, where we missed the understanding of what we were walking into, and then tell us how we did in the execution piece. And it's not fun. It is not pretty, but it definitely, just like you're saying, John, it definitely makes you better. Because as we're frantically writing down all these notes that the other pilots gathered from our flight and how we briefed that flight and how we planned for that flight, it opens up your eyes to so many other aspects that the other pilots are seeing. And it's almost like having a coach, be right there, and it's live and it's real and it's gritty. And you hit the nail on the head, Michael, when you said, so many times these days we have kids or young adults who don't really want that criticism, or who are uncomfortable with receiving criticism because it's harsh and it could be a little uncomfortable and it could, lead to some negative thinking. But man, is it valuable? John, just like you're saying, it shapes who you are going to be and how you receive that criticism, and change those things that you're doing and tweak the little things here and there. Just makes for a much more valuable experience in life. So I'm glad you pointed on that.
John Buckley, not John Ballenger, made a really, you guys are both making good points, but in John Buckley's response, there was a really important point there around the delivery of that criticism. Because having been a recipient of both good and bad criticism myself over the years, I can distinguish and apply sort of what's worked and what has worked well for me. And what I used to say to my teams is, don't attack the person, attack the problem. And so if you're focused on the problem and how to resolve that problem, whether it's an individual problem or it's a problem among the team and what they're trying to accomplish, it's a better way to focus that energy and figure out how to make your way to, the goal that you want to get to.
Yeah.
I learned in my college days, I also got a concentration in coaching, and one of my objectives, or alternative objectives, I guess you could say, or options that I finally started to create for myself, was possibly go into high school coaching. And one of the things that I really learned and really grasped was just you're talking about, Michael, the delivery of the criticism. It's like for every 3 things that you say negative, for every 3 kicks in the pants, so to speak, you got to have at least 1 pat on the back. So anytime that I would give criticism and I would expect, from somebody criticizing me, that certainly there's going to be some things that I got to work on, but at the same time, you ought to, tell them what's positive.
Yeah.
John, I want to back up.
Okay.
Before you alluded a little bit to, becoming an Army officer, but I want to go back to that high school period. You were playing baseball, but you realized soccer was kind of the sport to pursue.
Yeah.
What led you in that direction? Was it the criticism? Was it self-reflection? What was the straw that kind of got you into shifting your focus?
Well, one thing I think that if you really looked at my life, you would say, well, this guy is Irish, which means he has no luck at all. Okay. And the real story there is that when I was in Kentucky growing up, we went to a very, very small school, and you'll scratch your head, but we used to play basketball, and we lost to a team that had the longest losing streak in the history of United States high school basketball.
Oh, no.
So we couldn't field a basketball team, but then the principal came out and said, okay, now we're going to play soccer. And I'm thinking, okay, well, we couldn't field 5 quality players on a basketball court. How are we going to field 11 on a pitch? But I actually was only in 7th grade, and I was playing high school soccer. So I started playing 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade before I moved to Texas. And I found I was really good at it. The stamina that was necessary, the strategy that's associated with it, kind of always having that constant flow of the game, and you have to make those adjustments in the game. There's no timeouts. You're not going to stop and have a huddle. I really fell in love with the sport. And when I moved to Texas, I thought for sure down in southeastern Texas there would be at least high school soccer, which there was none. The only soccer that they played were old man sports, that they would collect on the weekends. And I'm like, so then as I mentioned earlier, I decided that I had no options coming out of high school, that I joined the Army. As fortune would have it, while I'm at basic training, I was given an opportunity to take a scholarship to go to a 2-year junior college where they gave ROTC. I think that at that time there were 5 junior colleges like that across the country. I'm not sure if I think there's 3 or 4 of them still around, but I took the opportunity, and the one that I chose, believe it or not, had a baseball program for college. So I'm thinking, great, this is the one I can get back into baseball and maybe, resurrect my career. And as my luck would have it, they stopped playing junior college baseball the year prior. So I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So I showed up, and they had nothing. And all they had was a club soccer team, which again combined high school and college. And I joined that. And as fortune would have it, that's what I got my scholarship in to move on to finish my college degree when I moved into Kansas. Wow. So it was just kind of fortune, I guess, or misfortune, however you would look at it, that's how I ended up with soccer. But that's how I then continued playing soccer for the next couple of years in college.
All this moving that you did, was that because was that because of a military background, or what was that due to?
It was not due to it was definitely not due to a military background. My dad, although when he was a young man, I think he was drafted or he joined the Army during the Korean era, but he never deployed into combat. He was infantry. And then he was in medical school when we were in Pennsylvania, and he took an opportunity in Kentucky with the specialty that he had. And then he wanted to get into aerospace medicine. And the only way to do that was to get into the Navy. So that's why I moved in my junior year. He joined the Navy as a flight surgeon and went down to Beeville, Texas, where they used to fly the jets. That's where they did the training for the jets. So that was my exposure to the military. It was about 1.5 years. And but it wasn't anything that was really impactful in my life and drew me into the military. It was purely because I thought I had no options in life, and this was the only thing that presented itself at the last minute.
Man, all right.
So avid soccer player, reservist, college student. How does all that start to culminate into a decision to become an officer in the Army and then spending the next 30 years committed to serving our country?
Well, as I went off to a 2-year junior college out in New Mexico, I was obviously exposed to the military. It was sort of like a miniature West Point or Texas A&M, however you want to call it, where we were in uniform all the time, and you were in military formations, and you had to do a lot more of a military lifestyle. And I got my commission, probably the most dangerous person in the world at that time. I was, I think, still 18 years old. And I got a commission as an officer, and I'm like, I'm probably the most dangerous person around right now. But I got an academic and an athletic scholarship to go to Benedictine College in Kansas. And I was accepted at other schools. I was accepted at Notre Dame. I was accepted at Rice University. And so I really turned myself around from an education standpoint. So there were people that were actually accepting me. but Benedictine was the only one that gave me scholarship. So I went off to Kansas. And when I got there, I quickly remembered where I was when I graduated high school. And I was not about to find myself in that same situation. So I set about trying to create as many opportunities as I could. So I changed my major. I added a concentration. I got a degree, a minor in education, so that I could, if I needed to, get out and be a high school coach of some sort. So that was at least giving me one opportunity. Since I was commissioned, I had no obligation. I had chosen what they call an academic delay, which gave me up to 3 years before I had to fulfill my military obligations. And after my first year of playing soccer there at Benedictine, I said, look, I am not going to go pro. I'm not going to make a career out of this. This is helping me pay my way through school. So I decided to join the National Guard. And that was probably the smartest thing that I ever did for a lot of reasons. But I joined the Guard, and then it really cut into my playing time. So after I ended up taking all 3 years of my academic delay. So after my first senior year, I stopped playing soccer and really committed to the National Guard. I think the reason that it was probably the best thing that I ever did was not just because it gave me some exposure to being a leader in the military, which it was an infantry unit, and I was put in as a platoon leader. I was given a special mission to do a nationwide evaluation, the first of its kind ever in the National Guard, and I did well. And so I really felt like I was doing something useful, and I could be successful at it. So I had the opportunity to, upon graduation, to either choose to go active duty or to stay in the National Guard. And I thought, okay, I could be in the National Guard at the same time I'm a teacher and a coach. So I was just creating all these opportunities for myself because I was not going to repeat what had happened, 4 years prior. But I think the ultimate thing that really helped me was I met, he's probably still my friend, Gary Wofford. Gary was a Marine, 2 tours of Vietnam, got out, came back to Kansas, which is where he was born and raised, and he joined the National Guard, and he was a company commander at the time. So he got a commission and was a company commander. And I think the lessons that I learned from him about leadership, about life, about responsibility, about integrity were probably the most formidable that I had my entire life. And I think because of that, that really drove me to be the leader that I was. But more importantly, he encouraged me to go active duty.
I will say a common thread that we're seeing amongst ourselves, John, and also among our guests, are that there are specific names of specific people throughout our lives that have really had significant impacts. And we remember those moments vividly from early childhood to where we are today. And it's just fascinating to me how there are those figures in our lives, men and women, who have those impacts. And sometimes they don't know it. And we talk about that on the show as well. It's let people know how important that person is to who you've become in life. It means a lot to them.
Yeah. And like you, John, I've got that name, for me, it's Jack Berrigan, the guy that stepped into my life and radically changed the perspective that I was taking and the path that I was on. So hearing a story like yours, where somebody can step into your life and create such momentum that you can build on and allow you to now leverage that information to go 30 years in the Army, that's, it's a testament to the person that stepped into your life or our life and recognizes that there's a need, but it's also a testament to how you listen and how you understand what's being presented to you and think, if I only take this to heart, I can build on this, and it radically changes the momentum that you're building. So 30 years spent in the Guard, and you rise to the rank of colonel. You're advising public leaders on strategy and helping the next generation of Army leaders. Give us a little insight into that 30-year time span, if you can.
Sure. It was only 3 years in the National Guard. And then when I graduated, I opted in to go active duty. So then it was followed by 30 years of active duty service.
Wow.
And I moved through the ranks, typical infantry, at platoon leader, commander, so on and so forth. But as I advanced in the ranks, there was at least 2 times in my life that I almost got out of the military because what I saw, you could say it was politics. I'm not sure what else you would want to call it, but posturing. As you can imagine, the military is very hierarchical in nature. So if you're a certain rank, there's going to be fewer that make it to the next rank, and so there's certainly some natural attrition, but there's also a lot of competition. And I hearken back to my team, playing on sports, in high school and younger, and I didn't see that in some of the ranks that I was achieving in the military. What I saw was cutthroat. People purposely trying to make somebody else look bad so that they could look good. And I'm like, this is not the kind of career that I want. Yeah. And I had been selected a year early to go off to school to make it to the next rank of major. And I was really thinking about not taking that next step. And I did, just to experience it. Right. And I had that same challenge after I went and I was in a unit. We had just come back from combat, and I was moved into a staff position, and I was only a senior captain, and I had all these majors, and I literally watched one another cut each other down. And there was one major that stood among the others that pulled me aside and basically say, you've got to stay above the fray. You got to think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and it's for the troops, it's for the mission, and forget about yourself. And if you focus on what's important, you're going to be taken care of. And it was really a breath of fresh air to see that there was somebody that had the same thoughts that I did and approach, and that's what really made the difference and kept me there. And then I think the next, I was a senior major in a brigade, and of course the majors are what make the brigade successful. Certainly there's a commander, he's going to make the decisions, but the people who really make the organization function are the majors. And I was fortunate enough to have that brigade commander who set that scenario and set that culture within our brigade, that it's all about helping each other. It's all about making the other person better so that the team gets better. And again, if it weren't for that, I think I would have really cut my military career short. And then I think probably one of the most memorable counselings that I got, I was, again, it's an Irish kind of a luck story, but I was in the war college, and I was taking a special class to get a special degree so that we could move Army officers into the interagency. And so I was one of about 16 people in the entire Army that was getting this special training, and on top of the normal education. And there was an opportunity that presented itself at the Pentagon, and there were 3 senior people who nominated me for that role, and the decision maker said no. And then I personally made a phone call to that decision maker, and he said no. And then I forget, there was a third interaction of I think a very senior officer who reached out, and they were friends, and the guy said no again. And then because of some changes of another individual, they say, okay, well, now we're in a position where we got to go a third option, and so John, we're going to select you. And it's like, wow, after 3 no's, I get this job. And I was literally brought into the Pentagon, I guess, with the perception that he was going to be okay. And then after less than 2 years, it was, you are irreplaceable. We can't send you to combat. we've got to send you over. And now I had to go from the chief of staff of the Army. I had to go work for the Secretary of the Army directly, not as a clerk or a coffee boy, but as an advisor. And I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute. 2 years ago, you didn't want anything to do with me, and now, 2 years later, you can't do without me. It doesn't make sense. But the counseling that I got at that time, because I really wanted to go to combat again, I wanted to get down there with the troops and really make a difference. And I think the comment was something along the lines of, the impact you have on the fight is not relevant to the proximity you are to the fight. And when I really digested that really motivated me to do things that were right, to do things that would really make a difference on the battlefield, not worry about what this person said or that person liked or, trying to impress my boss, but it was truly for the troops on the ground, regardless of how many levels below me, if you will, that they were. And so I really got exposed to some tremendous leaders, and I really got exposed to how the Army works and how the Department of Defense works. And I mean at the finest intricacies, from the strategy to the manning decisions to funding decisions. So I mean, it really was a tremendous education for me, as well as an opportunity to make a difference for the troops.
Yeah.
John, the hierarchical dynamics that you're describing and the cutthroat nature as you move up the metaphorical pyramid, that exists in corporate America as well, unfortunately. But I think if you inherently have a high degree of integrity like yourself, you are able to separate yourself from that stuff. And you alluded to also a key ingredient being grit to get yourself into those positions, as well as I think maybe when you were the so-called third option, you might have had a little chip on your shoulder, like, hey, I could have proved myself again. And maybe that came from some of your sports and all of the competitive sort of nature that you have in you, which we find among our audience as well. So anything you want to share about how you went about that, like maintaining your integrity, but also sort of pushing yourself to get recognized as a leader and respected advisor in where you wound up in the Army?
Yeah, there's no doubt that my reputation or my feelings or my abilities were questioned and challenged, and I really was frustrated with that. But I go back to a lesson that I learned with Ron, the quadriplegic, in the sense that you've got to resilience is really what it came down to. I've got to really have some resilience here, and that means that you kind of keep at it. And then I think the second one is going back to Gary. I mentioned him, the Vietnam vet that was my company commander, was, don't take no from a pissant. And it's not so much that you don't, certainly there's some finesse here. You don't just push somebody around, but if they're not the real authority, especially in a bureaucracy like the Pentagon, if they're not the real decision maker, if they don't really have the rights to make a decision, then don't take no from them. There is a way to get to yes. And I really think that was something that made me successful in the Pentagon, is I didn't take no from a pissant, but I used finesse to get to that yes. It may not be the perfect solution, it may not be what I intended, but at least we're moving in the right direction. So there was a lot of lessons that I drew upon in my young, growing up days when I got into the Pentagon and had those kinds of challenges.
John, your story, it resonates with me because in my career, I have seen some phenomenal leaders, pilots, officers, even enlisted Marines hear no to a promotion or to a deployment or to a duty station, and they hear no, but they keep at it and they keep persisting. And one of my favorite commanding officers heard no 3 times to taking a squadron. And on the fourth time, he took that squadron, or took a squadron. And, talk about grit. That just, it resonates with me, because you see that officer or that individual in that position after they've gone through no's and defeat and, the Heisman of just, not right now. And you think, you are one of the most amazing people I could ever serve under. How did you get told no several times? And so, your story of hearing that and then persisting and being resilient, it's good. It's amazing to hear just another great story, great example of how important persistence is to getting to where you want to go. So you go through all that, and eventually moment hits where that end of service is coming, and you see that light at the end of the tunnel, like we all do, and you wanted to help in a different way. You wanted to potentially help veterans transition and help that process be better than what it was. Talk to me about the end of your career and what you're seeing to drive you into that direction.
It briefs much better than it played out. I mean, it sounded really easy and very simple the way you presented it, but in reality, it was an absolute, it was a mess. I was a complete failure. I really was. And you would sit there and think, okay, if you're a complete failure, then how is it that you're more of a thought leader in this space? And I think, again, it was because of my failures that opened my eyes to the challenges. And I did everything that the military wants you to do, everything that DOD requires you and Congress does. I went to the transition class. I did all those things. And as I began to apply, I realized that I was getting rejected. The end of the day, I was 0 for 155. That means I got 0 job offers for 155 applications. Now imagine if I was on a baseball diamond, I would definitely never make it into the pros. So it was a terrible batting average. And when I was just confused as to why this was happening. All the senior leaders in the military were telling me, people are going to die to hire you. That's true. But what I didn't understand was the huge cultural and communication gap that existed. We in the military have this entirely separate culture, and we think, yes, we know the transition. We've got to find a job, apply for a job, submit a resume, do an interview, and then onboard. I mean, we understand that, but we don't know where all the minefields were. So after I was a complete failure, and I was literally sitting at the kitchen table with tears in my eyes, not understanding what the heck was going on, I decided to stop what I was doing, and I put my strategic planning hat on. And I said, the first thing that I got to do is I got to study my enemy. Well, in combat, obviously, you can't go sit across the enemy, sit across the table from you with your enemy and say, what are you going to do to me today? Because I want to prepare to learn how to beat you, right? So instead, I said the enemy in my mind were the recruiters. So I literally went out and I had found 10 recruiters that I had worked with, and I spent about 2 hours with each of them, one-on-one, and I was asking them about their job and how they did it and why they did it. So in essence, I was saying, what are your weapons of war? And then how do you, what's your max effective ranges, and how do you put them into practice in a defensive posture? Yeah. And I got to attack you. But after I learned how and why they do things, the why was probably the most important. I was then able to come up with a simple strategy to beat them. And I kid you not, my very first application after that, I quite frankly, it was like 2 or 3 applications. I ended up getting 3 job offers. So I was in the best place that you could be, in the sense that I could choose which was best for me, or negotiate a better settlement, if you will, so that it really put me in a good position. Yeah. But then it was, again, just by accident how I ended up in this kind of a career field. But after just a matter of weeks, I realized that every single veteran that I met who was applying for a job was doing the exact same wrong things that I was doing. And it just repeated itself over and over and over again. It was like Groundhog Day every day. And it's like, we all go to the same training, but we're all making the same mistakes, and it's not making it any better. So that's what really compelled me to find solutions and to help others in their transition.
Wow.
The tech company I left was on a mission to help companies understand people's pasts in a different way, but it wasn't military transitions. It were people who were impacted by the justice system. And that's actually kind of how John and I got connected, through Harley Blakeman, who started a company called Honest Jobs. He himself has been impacted by the justice system, turned his life around, and is now paying it forward and helping others in that way. And I think that's how John and Harley got connected. We'll get Harley on the show at some point. But it was a really interesting sort of introductory conversation that John and I had, and we're talking about some of the similarities in transitioning from something significantly different to where you want to go. It's amazing to hear someone with your background, John, put 155 requests in for employment and get 0 callbacks or go, at least some sort of meaningful lead, so to speak, in what you could pursue. But I don't know if of the 3, after you sort of changed your mindset and changed your approach after doing some discovery with the recruiters, that was a very smart move on your part. Those next 3 offers that you got, one of them was Koch Industries.
That's correct.
Getting that correct? Okay. And so for those who are unfamiliar with Koch Industries, they're the second largest private employer in the nation. And I think one of the strongest in terms of hiring veterans as well as justice impacted folks, and understanding those circumstances that might be different, but shouldn't necessarily define what you're able to deliver in terms of your work ethic and output. So tell us a little bit about that, John, and that experience there, some of the key learnings, what you were able to build, and then where that's led you up to this point.
Sure. I actually built the 2 strategies that you referenced, the military recruiting and retention strategy, and then what we called the Creating Second Chance initiative, which was also a strategy. And it started, and both of them, quite frankly, started the same way, which was, let's identify the barriers. What are the barriers that these individuals face? Because if we don't understand that, then how are we going to create solutions for them? And then secondly, then you start to analyze what are the potential solutions to help them overcome those barriers. And what I quickly discovered was that, and this isn't just consistent with that company, it's consistent with any company in the United States, quite frankly, is we leverage what we call applicant tracking systems, which are, quite frankly, tools that make our lives easier. And they're designed with a more traditional applicant in mind. And anytime you get somebody who is not traditional, if you will, they have different experiences, different expectations, different skills, different, you name it, they're going to have trouble and they're going to get kicked out of the system like I did. Yeah. As I said earlier, it was, I didn't understand where the minefields were in the process. And when I started to understand the why associated with why things are done, why this applicant tracking system tool does this and why it looks for that, then I could better understand how to overcome that. So as I identified the barriers, then I was able to better identify what are the possible solutions that we as a company could implement. And then more importantly, find out from the leadership, what were they willing to implement to help these people overcome? Because in the end of the day, like you said, these are people, they could be folks that had a criminal background. They could be folks who had a military career. They could be single moms returning to the workforce. You name it, immigrants, different cultures. And so what are you willing to do to help them overcome those barriers? And at the end of the day, what you're going to find is you're going to have a much more loyal employee, and you're going to find that the diversity in your workforce is actually making you that much better.
Yeah.
I'm personally grateful, John, for you being in that space and you putting so much effort into it. And now years later, we've got organizations like yours. We've got organizations like Hire Heroes USA, Hire Our Heroes, these businesses and nonprofits that exist to help military members, single family, single mothers, the people that you named, help them specifically get the traction that they so desperately want, deserve, need to get back out there and be an impact that they can be. And it's amazing to hear what you had to go through to get where you are today. And it resonates again. Your story resonates with me in that I put out application after application and kept hearing no, kept hearing, the deferred answers of, well, why don't you actually think about this because of the military career you had in the past? And it's like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do something new. And so these organizations like yours and like the ones I mentioned exist and are making a significant impact. So one, just thank you for the heartfelt effort that you put into it to help service members and individuals today.
Yeah, I think some of the organizations you mentioned, certainly they're some of the best out there, and I've interacted with most, if not all of them, but they don't necessarily solve the whole problem. And
Sure.
Again, the way I look at it is this is a huge chasm between two cultures, whatever the other culture is, whether it's the military or prison life or whatever. But the cultures that the gap has to be closed from both ends. And so
Okay.
I spent most of my early part of my civilian career focusing on what I knew best, which was the military culture, and then later the second culture. What can I do to help them coach, teach, and mentor them to overcome some of those barriers? But then
Sure.
I was struggling with mostly is the company. How did they contribute to closing this gap? Because you got to close it from both ends. And that's
Absolutely.
where I find a little bit of the organizations you mentioned are predominantly focused on the applicant, job seeker, and not necessarily on the business. And that's where I think I found most of my challenges and successes to the problems is getting the company to do things differently, at least for a small segment of their applicant pool, so that you can really find the best person for the job and not just the easiest to identify and select. And that's where I think they make most of their mistakes.
Well, I appreciate you clarifying that. And I understand now that, what you're talking about is as far as end user or end, the into the company and figuring out, the true problem that exists on both ends. And so I'm grateful again for you doing that.
Yeah. And John, you're a recognized leader in this space now, obviously proud as you should be with some of the programs you've put in place with Coke. And you've recently moved on, I think, to now start over and build a program inside of Textron Aviation.
Yeah, Textron. It's obviously they make airplanes and jets and whatnot, but yeah, it was an opportunity to kind of get a second go at it. And so I obviously have some experiences and some knowledge and some things in my playbook, but I just recently started working in earlier this month with Textron Aviation, and so it's what are their needs, what are their challenges, how are they doing things, and so I'm early in that stage of seeing, trying to identify if there's issues and where the issues are, and then maybe where I can apply some solutions to help them improve in their military veteran recruiting. Absolutely.
John, our stories are kind of intertwining because earlier this year, I just took a job with a company called Guardian Jet, and we broker aircraft, but I'm very familiar with Textron. So it puts a smile on my face to hear you talking about your service with them now.
Yeah, I'm really excited. The leadership is very much involved and engaged and interested, and that in itself right there is the number one requirement, is that you've got leaders who are going to advocate for these kinds of things so that they can improve their workforce. And in today's economy and today's labor market, it's something that's necessary. I mean, if they weren't looking for if they didn't have open jobs, then they wouldn't need to do something special. But in today's labor market, why not leverage folks who are in the best leadership laboratory in the world,
Absolutely.
in the military, and then leveraging those experiences in the private sector. I think there's just phenomenal opportunity on both sides with this company. I'm really excited.
Yeah, hopefully Coke and Textron are not anomalies. I hope it's a larger underlying trend among employers in the U.S. to reevaluate how they're evaluating potential employees, especially from the military community. So I commend you, John, on pursuing that. I hope you're as successful at Textron, which I'm sure you will be, as you were at Coke.
Thank you for that. Absolutely excited about the opportunity for sure. John, for other veterans out there, what are, or anyone else as well, contemplating or just getting started in their second act in life? We love to ask this question, but what are some of the things someone should be thinking about to increase their probability of success in your mind? I think one of the first lessons that I learned, as I mentioned, coming out of high school, is you've got to create opportunities for yourself. And so the first tip would be, don't wait until you've got your separation or retirement papers in hand to start thinking about it. You need to start thinking about it now. It may be the furthest thing from your mind, but you've got to start preparing. And some of the really simple things that I would recommend, I refer to one, I call it the top 10. Now, certainly it could be more than 10, it can be less than 10, but the idea is that you identify what are the things that are essential in your life when you make that transition. Maybe it's, I want a work-life balance where I can coach my kids in soccer. Maybe it's, I want to go hunt and fish on the weekends. Maybe it's, I want an opportunity to advance and grow. I want a company that's willing to pay some additional education so I can get a technical certificate. Or what are those things? Lay them out. And I even say, if you've got a significant other, send them to the master bedroom. You go to the basement. You do it independently. And then you go find your best friend or a referee, and you come to the kitchen table, tie your hands behind your back, and then exchange your list, because they're going to be totally different. And then before you get away from that table, come up with one list, because the last thing you want to do is cause friction in your relationship because you chose to do this. I mean, I've got stories of people that this is a great job, and they go to an area, and especially with the military, they have this mentality of, we have to embrace the suck. Right? Well, they go off to southern Alabama, which is a great place to live and work, but their families are in Oregon. And they're like, why are we way down here when grandma's way up there? And they had to move, So think about those things. Start with the most critical and what's most important, and then use that as you think about where you're going to go. Don't start looking at companies to work for if they don't have them in the locations you want to go, or vice versa. Don't go to an area that doesn't have a company you're looking to work for. Look for the company's culture. Look for the company's values, because that's another challenge. The second thing I tell folks to do, I call it informational interviewing. And I didn't even know that was a term when I started doing that. And that's basically finding somebody, for example, I want to be a mechanic. Well, go find a mechanic. Go take them out for a coffee or a beer and start asking them questions. And it's better if you find somebody who is in the military and are now that mechanic that you're looking to be. Ask them about, the career, the opportunities, the requirements, what professional association should I belong to?
all the different things that are important to you, you can learn more about that career, or you can turn it to a company. Find somebody who works for a company, say, what's the leadership structure like? What's the values like? What's the work environment like? What's the culture? Do you really get some time off? Again, spend the time learning. I make the analogy of, again, using my military, strategic hat on. You're getting ready for an attack, and usually you have some intelligence about what's across the enemy lines, but you don't have a perfect picture. So what do?
Yeah.
You send scouts out. You send those scouts out to paint that picture for you and tell
Absolutely.
you what's out there, so you get a better picture. Well, that's the same thing. You're the scout now, or maybe that mechanic is the scout. Go talk to them and learn about what's out there. But the biggest thing you really got to focus on is this environment, this culture, this work environment. What are things? What are if you can, while you're talking to these folks, you're learning about the language that they use. You're learning about how things are done. You're learning that it's an extremely flat organization compared to the military. So you're not going to have somebody walk into your office and tell you what to do. And I think the biggest thing is be ready to take the initiative. Because in the military, we do take the initiative within the construct, within the values the direction that we're given. We do take the initiative, but we get out into the private sector and we feel like we can't take the initiative for some reason or other. And I hear these stories over and over and over again. And I think the biggest thing that you can do is be prepared to take that initiative, mainly because it is such a flat organization. You have to succeed by collaborating with others, not waiting for somebody to tell you to do something. So those are 3 or 4 tips that I would tell folks that they need to apply before they make that transition. Start early, learn everything you can about the career field or the company, but more importantly, establish what's important to you and then stay focused on that.
Yeah.
2 things I love that you said is I call it pro-con, the decision, but writing those things down and getting in front of your significant other and getting in front of somebody else with a referee, like you said, and hashing out those conditions that you want to pursue. And then secondly, you mentioned taking somebody out and picking their brain. That may be the most valuable cup of coffee or valuable lunch you have when you take that person in that industry that you're pursuing out and you hear all the things that, you may like or dislike, will save a ton of time, a ton of heartache, a ton of decision making. I know that when I was trying to branch out of the Marine Corps and figure out if I was going to fly or not, or go into corporate America or government contracting, and I kept taking into people out and asking those questions, and I kept hearing, well, I'd say, hey, do you like this job? Well, the money's good, but I don't know, first indicator, I am not going to fit in to this industry. And so you're spot on about being methodical and really starting early to start aligning your thoughts and what you want to do with the things that you're good at and the things that you think you're going to be able to enjoy for the next career and the next act.
Yeah. And for any company decision makers that are listening to this conversation, Andrew, the CEO of Hire Heroes USA, presented Senate testimony last year that involved a lot of data. And the data says that veterans make excellent employees post-military.
No, I definitely agree with you. There's a lot of data out there that indicates that the military veteran usually gets promoted or advanced much more than their non-veteran peer. They look at the economic status of the military individual or former military individual, and the same thing, economically, they do a whole lot better. And then when you start talking to leaders and getting the feedback from leaders, there are several things that they absolutely prefer to have a military veteran over a non-veteran. And some of that is taking that initiative. The soft skills, believe it or not, are. Yes, the hard skills are what attract you initially and maybe get you that job, but what makes a difference are the soft skills, that ability to focus on the team, improve the team, the diverse aspect of things, taking the initiative, the integrity, being punctual sometimes is amazing. I was on a panel, and a gentleman who had just gotten hired was talking and bragging about how he had gotten all sorts of bonuses like every month. And the reason is because he was on time 5 days in a row. I'm like, he made several $1,000s because the company is going to, compensate you for being on time. So there are a lot of things I think that absolutely reveals that a military veteran can be one of your best employees. But there are some things that companies and leadership probably need to take into consideration that can really bring that out in the veteran. Simple things like assigning a veteran mentor and somebody who's been with the company, who's willing to take them under the wing and say, hey, we don't do it like that. Speaking of Marines, there was one of the funniest stories was I had a hiring manager come into me and just start letting me have it. And I was like, wait, what's going on? He goes, well, how do I get this Marine to stop calling me sir? And I'm like, really? That's what your issue is? Well, I take from that he's not, he's not agile. He doesn't learn. He's not able to adjust to things. And I want him to call me by my first. So then I started digging, and it's like, well, he's responsible to put together our weekly meeting, and it's a global meeting. And so we go into this conference room, and we have a video teleconference that we use. But he goes in 15 minutes early, and he ran the CEO out of the conference room because he had to get ready for our conference. You can't do I said, okay, wait, stop. So I had to educate him a little bit. But at the same time, I was able to talk to the Marine and explain some things to him about, this isn't the military, and you're just going to have to be a little more. And once he got that, he was perfect, but the idea is, and I'm not picking on Marines, it just, he happened to be a Marine. But it is a story of the leadership has to understand that there are going to be cultural challenges. We get a new job in the military, it seems like every other year. We're getting promoted, and we know what our career path is. And I got to take this school to get to this rank. And then I got to do this job successfully before I get to that rank. And you come out into the private sector, and that's not the way it is. And so after 18 months, you've been doing a job, and you're like, nobody's asking me about my next job. Why am I not and it's not done that way in the private sector. You've got to take ownership of your own career. So there are those kinds of things. So yes, absolutely, without a doubt, unequivocally, I think a lot of military veterans will make tremendous employees and make your company better. But if you do things on your own as a company that will enable that and bring that out in them and make them a better employee, I think it's a win-win for everybody.
Yep.
For your customers especially.
All right, I think we're wrapping up here, John, are we?
Man, there's just I'm sitting here trying to digest everything that John has been talking about, and I just really appreciate the viewpoint that he's coming from, regarding how companies are looking backwards at the employee and not just the employee looking at the company. And it's just, man, if I had these nuggets 6 months ago, 8 months ago, when I was in the pursuit of looking for a job, it would have allowed me to give grace to myself a little bit more. So I think this is a valuable conversation to have for those veterans that are about to transition, for the veterans that have transitioned and are just thinking that this new task of finding another career is impossible because they're striking out. I mean, 155 times, John, that you endured, and you're, now you're a thought leader in this area. So I just commend your hard work and your effort for the communities that you're representing. And I want to say thank you for your service to our country and the support you especially provide to the military veteran community. You have an incredible background, and Michael and I are grateful for the opportunity to have you on the show. So if people want to find you and get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can obviously find me on LinkedIn. That's a technique. Look for John Buckley in Wichita, Kansas. Or you can send me an email, jbuckley02@txtav.com, and I'll put it phonetically, Tango X-ray Tango Alpha Victor.com. Those are two ways that you can get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to either answer any questions or accept any challenges. And certainly, as I said at the very beginning, I invite your criticism.
Sure. Well, that's what this show is all about, and we appreciate the comments that we get and the feedback we get about our guests and how impactful that they have been. And I know that this is in no doubt going to be another one of those episodes. And so we'll be sure to include your links to LinkedIn and to your email in the episode details. And thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today. And we look forward to following the impact you have on the nation's veterans. So, John, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for reaching out, taking the risk to reach out to me, and certainly I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm humbled by your comments and feedback. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, great episode, and Michael, thanks for again crushing this with our guest, John Buckley, and I look forward to connecting with you guys next week.
All right. Thanks, guys.
The Second Act with Michael and John stars Michael Newborn and John Ballenger. The podcast is produced by Seltzer Kings. For more information on the show, check out michaelandjohn.com, or if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, give the guys a shout on their socials at The Second Act with Michael and John on most platforms. Thanks for listening.